Why you can't stop thinking at night. You make it through the entire day distracted, busy, and exhausted. Then the moment your head hits the pillow, your brain suddenly decides it's time to replay every mistake, predict every disaster, and solve problems that don't even exist yet. It feels irrational, but there's a reason it happens. Your brain finally has silence. During the day, your attention is constantly occupied. Notifications, conversations, work, errands, scrolling, noise, responsibilities. Your brain is surrounded by stimulation every minute. At night, all of that disappears, and in the silence, unresolved thoughts become impossible to ignore. Your brain is suddenly creating new worries at 2 a.m. It's finally turning toward the thoughts and emotions you didn't have time or energy to process during the day. The quiet doesn't create the anxiety, it reveals it. Anxiety becomes stronger in the dark. Nighttime changes the way the mind experiences problems. With fewer distractions and less grounding from the outside world, even small concerns can suddenly feel enormous. A text you forgot to answer becomes proof someone hates you. A minor mistake becomes a threat to your future. An uncertain situation becomes a catastrophe your brain tries desperately to prepare for. The exhausted brain is emotional, not rational. When you're tired, your ability to think clearly weakens, while fear and imagination become louder. That's why thoughts that seem manageable during the day can feel overwhelming at night. Your mind mistakes thinking for control. Overthinking often feels productive because the brain treats analysis like protection. If I keep thinking about this, maybe I can prevent something bad from happening. So, you replay conversations. You rehearse future scenarios. You mentally prepare for problems over and over again. But most nighttime thinking ain't real problem solving. It's emotional looping. The mind keeps searching for certainty, closure, or control, things it often cannot fully obtain. And because there's no real resolution, the cycle continues. Unprocessed emotions surface at bedtime. Many people spend the entire day suppressing emotions just to function. Stress, loneliness, anger, regret, fear. There's rarely enough space to fully feel them while managing everyday life. But at night, when distractions fade, those emotions rise to the surface. Sometimes the thoughts keeping you awake aren't actually thoughts at all. They're emotions asking to be acknowledged. The mind starts talking because the heart hasn't been heard all day. Your body is tired, but your nervous system isn't. Physical exhaustion does not automatically create mental calm. You can feel completely drained while your nervous system remains highly alert. Constant pressure, stimulation, scrolling, caffeine, emotional stress, and nonstop mental activity train the brain to stay on guard. So, when bedtime arrives, your body may lie down, but your brain still believes it has a job to do. It stays vigilant, scanning, preparing, thinking. The nervous system does not instantly switch off simply because the day is over. The more you fight the thoughts, the louder they get. Most people respond to nighttime thoughts by resisting them. Stop thinking, just go to sleep. Why can't I shut my brain off? But resistance often strengthens the cycle. The brain treats unwanted thoughts like unfinished tasks. The harder you try to force them away, the more urgent and important they begin to feel. Sometimes calm begins when you stop treating every thought like an emergency. Not every fear needs solving tonight. Not every emotion requires immediate action. And not every thought deserves your full attention, simply because it appeared in the dark. Sometimes the mind quiets down not when you force silence, but when you finally stop fighting the noise. Anxiety becomes stronger in the dark. Anxiety doesn't actually increase at night. It just feels like it does. The same thoughts that were faint or manageable during the day can suddenly feel intense, urgent, and overwhelming once the world goes quiet. The shift isn't in the problem itself, but in the conditions your mind is trying to process it under. During the day, your brain is constantly anchored by external reality. You're responding to emails, talking to people, navigating tasks, moving through physical spaces, and reacting to real-time input. Even when anxiety is present, it competes with structure and distraction. There is always something else demanding attention. At night, that structure disappears. There are fewer inputs, fewer interruptions, and far less external grounding. Without that steady stream of reality checks, the mind begins filling in the gaps. It turns inward, scanning for anything unresolved, uncertain, or emotionally unfinished. And because there's nothing to pull attention away, those internal signals feel louder than they actually are. This is where anxiety distorts perception. A minor concern doesn't stay minor when it's isolated in silence. A delayed reply becomes a story. A vague uncertainty becomes a prediction. The mind, left alone in the dark, tends to prefer certainty over ambiguity. Even if that certainty is negative, it would rather imagine a worst-case scenario than sit with not knowing. Fatigue also plays a major role. When you're tired, the brain's ability to regulate emotional intensity decreases. The rational, analytical parts of thinking become less efficient, while emotional processing takes the lead. That means fear-based interpretations gain more influence. Even when they aren't accurate, the result is a subtle but powerful shift. Thoughts feel more believable simply because they feel more intense, and intensity is often mistaken for truth. Another reason anxiety strengthens at night is the lack of immediate action. During the day, anxiety often gets discharged through movement. You solve a problem, respond to a message, or take some form of action that reduces uncertainty. At night, that outlet disappears. There's nothing to do, nowhere to go, no resolution available in the moment. So the mind loops instead of resolves. It replays, it rehearses, it predicts, not because it is helping, but because it is trying to regain a sense of control in a situation where control is temporarily unavailable. In that sense, nighttime anxiety is less about new problems and more about unfinished ones. The mind gathers everything unresolved from the day and brings it forward when the world is finally quiet enough to notice it. What makes it feel worse is the contrast. Daytime distraction creates the illusion of stability, while nighttime silence removes it. The shift can make anxiety feel sudden, but it has often been building in the background all along. Understanding this doesn't make anxiety disappear instantly, but it changes what it means. The thoughts aren't warnings of something going wrong in real time. They are delayed processing, amplified by silence and fatigue. And while they feel urgent, they are not always urgent to solve. In the dark, the mind becomes louder, not because danger increases, but because everything else finally stops talking. Your mind mistakes thinking for control. Overthinking often doesn't feel like a problem while it's happening. In fact, it can feel responsible, even necessary. The mind creates the sense that if you just keep analyzing a situation a little longer, you might finally reach certainty, or at least reduce the risk of something going wrong. But that feeling is the illusion at the center of it. The brain is not simply thinking, it is trying to regain control in situations where control is limited or unclear, and it does this by generating more thought, not better outcomes. At its core, this process is rooted in protection. The mind is designed to detect uncertainty and respond to it. When something feels unresolved, a relationship dynamic, a work decision, a future possibility, the brain treats that ambiguity as a problem that still needs solving. It assumes that more thinking equals more safety. So, it starts running simulations. You replay conversations, searching for hidden meaning. You imagine future scenarios, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. You review past events, looking for mistakes that could be corrected retroactively. It feels like preparation. It feels like prevention. But most of the time, it's neither. It's the mind trying to create the feeling of control in a space where actual control is not available. The key misunderstanding is this: thinking feels like doing because thoughts are active, structured, and repetitive. The brain confuses mental effort with real-world impact. It interprets the act of analyzing something as progress, even when nothing is changing externally. This is why overthinking can be so sticky. It produces the sensation of work, without producing resolution. But control in life does not come from prediction. It comes from response. And most of what the mind tries to solve in overthinking is not solvable in advance. It can only be met in real time, through action, adaptation, or acceptance of uncertainty. The problem is that uncertainty is uncomfortable, so the mind tries to eliminate it prematurely. It searches for closure before closure is available. It demands answers before enough information exists, and when those answers don't appear, it assumes more thinking is required. This creates a loop. Uncertainty triggers thinking. Thinking temporarily reduces discomfort, and that temporary relief teaches the brain to repeat the process again next time. Over time, the habit strengthens, even though it rarely leads to actual resolution. Another subtle trap is the belief that thinking prevents mistakes. The mind assumes that if it can rehearse enough scenarios, it can avoid all negative outcomes. But life doesn't respond to rehearsal the way the mind expects. Most outcomes are shaped by variables no amount of thinking can fully simulate. So, instead of preventing problems, overthinking often just keeps the nervous system activated. It maintains a sense of urgency without providing a real exit. What gets lost in this cycle is the difference between awareness and control. Awareness is useful. It helps you notice possibilities, risks, and emotions. Control, however, is limited. Not everything can be managed in advance, and not every outcome can be predicted or optimized through thought alone. The mind resists that reality, so it keeps generating more thinking, hoping that somewhere inside the loop there will be certainty. But certainty is rarely found in repetition. It is usually found in acceptance of what cannot be fully known ahead of time. The irony is that the more the mind tries to control through thinking, the more out of control it feels, because thought multiplies possibilities faster than it can resolve them. Each new scenario creates another layer of uncertainty to manage. Eventually, the system becomes overloaded, not because there is too much happening in reality, but because too much is happening internally. Recognizing this pattern is not about stopping thought altogether. It is about noticing when thinking has shifted from useful reflection into the attempt to control what cannot be controlled. And in that moment, the goal is not to think harder, but to step out of the belief that more thinking will finally produce certainty, because often it won't, and control was never in the thinking to begin with. Unprocessed emotions surface at bedtime. There's a reason some people feel emotionally heavier at night. Even if the day itself didn't seem particularly difficult, it isn't that new emotions are appearing, it's that the ones already present finally have space to be felt. During the day, most emotional experiences don't get fully processed, not because they aren't important, but because there's rarely enough room for them. Life keeps moving. You keep functioning. Work, conversations, responsibilities, decisions, and distractions all demand attention. So emotions often get compressed, delayed, or quietly set aside just to get through the day. Stress gets pushed aside so you can stay productive. Sadness gets postponed so you can keep going. Frustration gets swallowed so you can stay composed. Loneliness gets ignored so you can stay engaged. None of this disappears the emotion. It simply stores it. At night, that storage system stops working the same way. The external noise fades, the tasks pause, and the mind is no longer occupied with immediate demands. And in that quiet space, everything that was set aside begins to surface again. It can feel like sudden overthinking, but often it is not thinking at all in the usual sense. It is emotional material trying to move through. Awareness after being held back for hours, days, or even longer. The mind then translates those emotions into thoughts, because thoughts are easier to interact with than raw feeling. Sadness becomes a memory. Anxiety becomes a prediction. Anger becomes a replay of conversations. But underneath all of it, the core experience is emotional, not logical. This is why nighttime thinking often feels repetitive and unresolved. The mind is not actually trying to solve a problem. It is trying to process a feeling it didn't have time to fully experience earlier. And because emotions don't resolve through analysis alone, the loop continues. The body also plays a role in this. When you finally lie down, there are fewer physical demands on your system. Movement slows, distraction decreases, external stimulation drops. This creates the conditions where internal states become more noticeable. Feelings that were muted by activity now have enough quiet to rise into awareness. Sometimes what surfaces is not dramatic or obvious. It might just be a subtle sense of unease, heaviness, or restlessness. But even that mild emotional signal can trigger the mind to search for an explanation, which turns feeling into thought and expands it further. What makes this experience confusing is that it often feels like it's coming out of nowhere. But in reality, these emotions usually didn't come out of nowhere. They were present earlier, just not fully acknowledged. The night simply removes the noise that was covering them. There is also a protective aspect to how the mind handles emotion during the day. Many people learn, consciously or not, to prioritize functioning over feeling. This isn't necessarily unhealthy. It's often necessary to meet life's demands. But when emotional processing is consistently postponed, the backlog eventually arrives when there is finally space for it. Bedtime becomes that space, and because the nervous system is tired, emotional regulation is weaker at night. The same feeling that might have been manageable earlier can feel more intense. When energy is low and defenses are down, that doesn't mean the emotion is bigger. It means the system handling it is more depleted. The important shift in understanding here is recognizing that these nighttime experiences are not failures of control or signs that something is wrong. They are signs that something has finally become visible. Emotions don't always need immediate solutions. Sometimes they need acknowledgement. They need to be felt without being immediately analyzed, fixed, or pushed away. But the mind often resists this, especially at night, when it prefers sleep over emotional processing. So it tries to turn feeling into thinking, again, hoping that if it can explain the emotion, it can quiet it. But emotions are not always resolved through explanation. They often settle only after they are allowed to exist, for a while without resistance. In that sense, nighttime emotional surfacing is not random. It is delayed processing finally finding an opening, and while it can feel uncomfortable, it is also a sign that the mind is no longer fully suppressing what it has been carrying all day. What rises at bedtime is not new. It is simply what was never given enough space to be felt. While everything else was demanding attention, your body is tired, but your nervous system isn't. There's a strange mismatch that happens for many people at night. Physically, you feel exhausted, heavy eyes, low energy, slowed movement, but mentally, your system still feels on. You lie down expecting rest, yet your mind continues to scan, analyze, and stay alert as if something still requires your attention. This disconnect is the nervous system at work. Your body and your nervous system don't always shift states at the same time. Physical fatigue is about energy depletion, nervous system activation about safety perception, and those two don't always line up. You can be completely worn out and still feel internally activated if your system has been in a heightened state throughout the day. Stress, pressure, constant stimulation, emotional tension, caffeine, deadlines, and even subtle background anxiety can keep the nervous system in a mode of readiness without you fully noticing it. It's like your body is saying we're done, while your internal system is still saying we might still need to respond. During the day, this state often goes unnoticed because there is always something to engage with: movement, tasks, conversations, screens, and responsibilities keep the system oriented outward. But at night, when external demands stop, the internal state becomes much more obvious. There is no longer anything to distract the system from itself, so the body lies down. But the nervous system doesn't immediately interpret that as safety. It is still carrying the momentum of the day, the unresolved stress responses, the mental vigilance, the subtle readiness to react. And because there is no external signal that everything is safe now, it continues operating in the same mode by default. This is why sleep can feel difficult even when you are physically exhausted. Sleep is not just a physical process. It requires a shift in nervous system state. The system has to move from activation to safety, from monitoring to letting go. And that transition is not always immediate. In some cases, the nervous system becomes conditioned to stay alert. If you spend long periods under pressure or overstimulation, your baseline can slowly adjust upward. Over time, normal starts to include a degree of internal tension, a quiet readiness that doesn't fully switch off at bedtime. So, even when your body is ready to rest, your internal system may still be scanning, replaying the day, anticipating tomorrow, processing unresolved interactions, or simply maintaining a low level of vigilance without a clear target. This creates a confusing experience. You are tired enough to sleep, but not settled enough to fall asleep. What makes this even more frustrating is that mental effort alone doesn't always fix it. Trying to force sleep, or trying to force calm, often keeps the nervous system activated, because it interprets that effort as another form of doing. The system doesn't relax, because it is being pressured to relax. It relaxes when it senses it is no longer needed in a protective role. That distinction matters. Fatigue belongs to the body, activation belongs to the nervous system, and they don't always resolve together. This is also why people can feel physically drained but mentally restless. The exhaustion is real, but so is the leftover activation. It's not contradiction. It's the systems operating on different timelines. The shift toward rest often happens gradually, not instantly. The nervous system needs cues of safety, reduced stimulation, lowered pressure, consistency, and time without demand. Without those cues, it continues doing what it was designed to do. Stay alert until it believes it can stand down. So, when you are in bed feeling tired, but still mentally switched on, it isn't a failure of rest. It's a system that hasn't fully received the signal that it's safe to stop monitoring. And until it does, the body may be ready for sleep, while the nervous system is still learning how to let go. The more you fight the thoughts, the louder they get. One of the most frustrating experiences at night is not just having intrusive or repetitive thoughts. It's noticing that the harder you try to stop them, the more persistent they become. What begins as a simple attempt to quiet the mind often turns into a mental tug-of-war that leaves you even more awake than before. This happens because the brain doesn't respond to thoughts the same way it responds to external problems. When you fight a physical obstacle, resistance can help. But when you fight your own thoughts, resistance tends to backfire. A thought, by itself, is just mental activity. It has no physical force. But when you label it as unwanted, when you try to push it away, suppress it, or argue with it, you unintentionally give it more importance. The mind interprets that reaction as a signal. This must be significant if we're spending so much energy resisting it. And so the thought returns, not because it is stronger, but because attention has been attached to it. This is one of the core traps of nighttime overthinking. The initial thought might be small or neutral, a memory, a worrying, a random scenario, but the moment you react with "I shouldn't be thinking about this," the mind creates a second layer, resistance. Now there are two processes happening at once, the thought itself, and the struggle against the thought. That struggle is what gives the experience intensity. The mind is not simply replaying ideas, it is monitoring itself, checking whether it is thinking correctly, and trying to enforce silence through force. But silence cannot be forced in the same way action can. The more effort you apply to suppress mental activity, the more active the monitoring system becomes. It's similar to being told not to think of something specific. The instruction itself brings the idea forward, not because the mind is disobedient, but because attention is how thoughts are held in place. When attention is directed towards suppression, the brain still has to represent what is being suppressed in order to recognize it. So the cycle continues. A thought appears, gives you resist it. Gives resistance, increases attention, gives attention. Strengthens the thought, gives the thought, feels louder. At night, this loop becomes even more noticeable, because there are fewer external distractions to dilute it. During the day, thoughts come and go quickly because attention is constantly shifting. At night, attention becomes fixed, and whatever it lands on tends to amplify. Another important layer is emotional response. When a thought is judged as bad, unwanted, or dangerous, it often triggers an emotional reaction, frustration, fear, or urgency. That emotional charge is what makes the thought feel louder, not the thought itself. The brain then misinterprets this emotional intensity as evidence that the thought is important or urgent, reinforcing the cycle. So, the real issue is rarely the content of the thought. It is the relationship to the thought. Trying to eliminate thoughts through force assumes that the mind should operate like a switch, on or off, controlled and obedient. But the mind doesn't work that way. It is a continuous system of associations, memories, predictions, and emotional signals. When it is pressured into silence, it often responds with more activity, not less. This is why many people notice that sleep arrives more easily when they stop actively trying to sleep. The same principle applies to thoughts. When the goal becomes stop thinking, the mind stays engaged in monitoring whether thinking has stopped, which keeps thinking active. The shift begins when thoughts are no longer treated as threats to eliminate, but as events passing through awareness. A thought can exist without requiring engagement. It can appear without requiring correction. It can be noticed without being escalated into a problem. This doesn't mean the mind becomes instantly silent. It means the struggle against it loosens. And when resistance drops, the intensity of thoughts often drops with it. Because what makes them loud is not their presence, it is the effort to push them away. Nighttime overthinking is a sign that your mind is broken or that something is wrong with you. It's what happens when a constantly stimulated, emotionally active system finally enters silence. The day keeps you distracted, structured, and externally focused, but at night, all of that fades, and what was delayed, suppressed, or unprocessed begins to surface. Thoughts feel louder in the dark because there is less competing input, not because the thoughts themselves have grown stronger. Anxiety feels heavier because fatigue reduces emotional regulation, not because the problems have suddenly become bigger. And mental loops persist because the brain is trying to create control, closure, or safety in a space where none of those can be fully manufactured through thinking alone. A key pattern runs through all of this. Resistance amplifies experience. The more you fight thoughts, the more attention they receive. The more you try to force silence, the more active the mind becomes in monitoring itself. And the more you treat every thought as urgent or meaningful, the harder it becomes to let them pass on their own. What changes the experience is not perfect control, but a shift in relationship. Thoughts can be present without needing to be solved. Emotions can surface without needing immediate resolution. The nervous system can be active without every signal requiring response. And silence does not have to be forced. It often emerges when struggle decreases. Understanding this doesn't instantly quiet the mind, but it changes how you interpret what's happening. Nighttime thinking becomes less of a problem to eliminate and more of a process the mind goes through when everything else finally slows down. And in that shift, the experience becomes less about fighting your mind and more about allowing it to settle in its own time.